And we continue our discussion now, and I still have my expert guest standing by in Washington, D.C., Ephraim Mkonya, Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Beijing. Wu Changhua, she's the chair of the China Redesign Hub, and with me in studio here, Dr. Richard Monang, Regional Climate Change Coordinator and UNEP, still with us on the program. Wu Changhua, let me go off to you first, because Richard Monang did mention that China had now stepped forward, or I believe Ephraim Mkonya did mention that China has now stepped forward with that U.S. exit. Of course, the world is going to be looking at China, will be looking at India following a possible U.S. exit here. So what contribution is China going to be making? What is China's position here?
I think from China perspective, let me take you probably one step back. Ever since last week, I think the world's attention, most of the attention has been focusing on China, how China was going to respond to U.S. President's decision or announcement, and also whether China would be willing to step up its leadership to fill the void created by U.S. Announcement at this moment. So most of the attention was on China. So if you look at China specifically, China started already a couple of years ago on a few fronts in terms of working more closely with the other developing countries. If you look at China and Africa, there were three things at least that has been sort of enhancing China and Africa relations and partnerships. One is a South-South collaboration. China committed to a South-South climate fund, putting in the basket somewhere $200 billion US, and from the public funding to support other developing countries to tackle climate change issues, particularly focus on increasing capacity and creating new energy development opportunities and build up clean energy or clean infrastructure. Second front actually is a China-Africa strategic partnership. And there's also a funding mechanism created with more than $600 billion US committed from China to support African countries specifically to develop clean energy, clean industry, and also build up a clean infrastructure there. And the third angle is the One Belt, One Road initiative. Now there are about 85 countries already in this partnership, and many of them from Africa. Right. So China, to a large extent, has already started a very, very close partnership, focusing on actions and practice solutions, working with other developing countries to tackle this issue. So whether China will step up to fill the so-called void or not, I think China will carry on its own commitment on domestic front, but more importantly, stepping up efforts, putting resources together to support other developing countries to move forward together.
Dr. Monang, climate financing has been a key issue here, and of course that $100 billion kitty that was meant to help developing countries mitigate and adapt to climate change effect here. So what now? What happens now?
Actually, the Green Climate Fund, as it currently is today, is just above 11 billion. But it needed to be capitalized up to 100 billion. So we're still short of that. But what the science is telling us, especially what is going to happen in the African continent if we hit the 2 degree, and I was speaking today, we are 1.1 degrees. So we're just a couple of degrees, degrees away from the 2 degrees. And as a result of that, if we were to hit 2 degrees, Africa will need 50 billion, which means even with the GCF as it currently is today, the amount in there will not be enough. So what does this mean? It means that Africa also needs to look internally. And looking internally means that they need to look at alternatives and look at sectors whereby if they were to invest, we could be able to build climate resilience and ensure that the youth who are unemployed, currently 60% of the 200 million youth that the continent have today unemployed, and we're seeing so many of them migrating out of the continent, shows that climate change is a security issue. Right. And if it's a security issue, just as prominence and importance is given to national security, it should be given to climate action, because climate action will also address food insecurity that is affecting 240 million people today. So the overarching way forward is looking internally as enshrined in Article 9, Paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement is an essential way to be able to implement actions, but implement those actions in catalytic areas like agriculture and renewable energy to add value. And the most important thing is, as we're speaking, Africa is 20 times less productive than most developed countries. And it is because it is not adding value to what it produces. It's exporting raw materials and spending 35 billion in importing food. So if Africa can be able to produce and process utilizing clean energy, it can be able to create the jobs and actually reduce the unemployment and also build resilience of communities in the continent.
Right. Ephraim Konya, let's get your perspective on that.
First, let me talk about China, the role of China that it plays in Africa. China is now the second largest donor to Africa after the US. But if you look at the structure of the support that it's giving, it is still very much into the energy and transportation and other things. Issues related to environment, China has not done much. But now, given that now US is stepping out, we hope that China is going to be increasing the investment and the support in the area of environment, which includes the climate change. But if you also look at what China has done internally in its own country, you can see that there is a very stellar example of payment for ecosystem services. There have been a lot of green great wall in the Gobi Desert and other places, which is showing the way what we can do in countries in Africa and in the African countries. Yes, we have to invest a lot in carbon sequestration and carbon mitigation because it is affecting us. But at the same time, once we invest into that, there are two types of benefits. There is the benefit which is internal, we get it ourselves, and benefits to the world. And in this regard, we see that maybe in our study that we just concluded, we show that the benefit is off farm, the benefit goes away from you, right, is about 54%, and only 46% is internal. So there is need for African countries to invest into the carbon sequestration because they have direct benefits into it.
Right. Wu Changhua, though China is one of the world's top producers of renewable energy here, and it has been pointed out that it probably needs to increase its investment externally, particularly in Africa, though. Are we going to see a bigger push, though, on that front in terms of renewable energy?
I think so. I think the push or the efforts, the track record is already on the ground, and definitely we can do more. The foundation is already laid. I want to emphasize one particular point for Africa. I think Africa today is at a critical juncture. On one side, I think, yes, we have to bear the climate resilience, the climate challenges, the consequences. But in the meantime, it's a critical moment of choice. I think particularly look at the experiences, efforts from China, African countries can learn a lot from that process. And with the technology progress already on the table around the renewable energy, around the environmental protection, ecological recovery, everything together, I think African countries faces a huge opportunities in terms of choosing green and smart and clean development paradigm. Only by doing so, we'll be able to take advantage of the technology progress, taking advantage of the investment available on the table, and potentially, all around the world that's market driven, so that we'll be able to create jobs, creating clean industry, clean energy, clean infrastructure in Africa. But in the meantime, that's going to dramatically contributing to the solution of global climate challenges that will definitely benefit African countries as well.
Dr. Munang, though Africa is at a critical point, there is a lot it can learn from China. What else can Africa do, though, in the moment to mitigate and adapt?
A lot can be done. There are no absence of innovation across the African continent. And if you look across the continent, from west to east, north to south, central, innovations are existing, but those innovations have not been brought to the fore. If you just look right here in Kenya, the mobile money, M-Pesa, which has been combined to decentralize clean energy off-grid in what is called M-Kupa, have actually not only reached 400,000 people, but it's actually transforming their lives and helping people in Eastern Africa, kids, to be able to study. And if you look in the western part of Africa, there is a technology called Zai, which is being used and have actually proven to increase yields up to about 500 kilograms per hectare, even in years that doesn't have rain. What is happening is that these technologies and innovative aspects need to be brought to the fore. And to do so, there needs to be investment, especially in solar energy, utilizing the knowledge that is existing, because we have common problems and also common solutions. And therefore, inclusive partnerships become very, very important, because in Section 5 of the Paris Agreement, state and non-state actors are very crucial in implementation, and therefore private sector, NGOs, civil societies, individual citizens like you and me must be able to come on board and drive climate actions as an investment opportunity, because that is the only way that we can be able to build climate resilience and actually ensure that the continent doesn't experience the fear of want on it.
Right, and we'll leave it there for the moment. That's all we have time for this week, but thank you to my guests for their insights in Washington, D.C. Ephraim Nkonya, he's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Beijing. Hu Changhua, she's the chair of the China Redesign Hub. And with me here in Nairobi, Dr. Richard Munang, he is the Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the United Nations Environment Program. Thank you for joining us here on the program. And do remember to join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. Goodbye.